Welcome everybody who's here. I'm Jeff Kittner with the North Dallas Chamber, and we're excited to have you all here for our Legislative Series program number 5 with the Texas Municipal League today with Bennett Sandlin as our guest speaker. What we had originally planned to do was to have a day at the state, a traditional day at the state, but due to COVID, we have pivoted into this virtual legislative series, which has been highly successful. So far, we've heard from Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar, State Representative John Turner, State Representative Morgan Meyer, and we've got a few more scheduled, including Texas Tribune's Ross Ramsey coming up, and Higher Education Commissioner Harrison Keller in 2 weeks, which you'll hear more about later on. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our good friend, Karen Hunt, who represents Frost Bank on our board, as well as the mayor of Capel for another few weeks. So Karen, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here, and thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are a couple of other people we would like to thank. There are sponsors for this program. We have AECom, Bradley, Frost Bank, HDR, HNTB, Jacobs, Encore, Texas Health Resources, Children's Health, Reliant, Hosanelli, all of which believe that this program series is very important, hence they are sponsoring it. We want to thank them for that sponsorship. And as we talk about all of the different things that are going on in the legislature, cities are very, very much attuned to what goes on into the legislature, because over the years, there's almost 7,000 bills, about 3,300-ish, and then I'm sure Bennett will give us some exacts here, but typically 3,300 or more are related to cities or how the cities receive money, what we're supposed to do with our money, all of those different things. And so it is very important for us to have an organization like Texas Municipal League, and it is a membership organization that specifically has lots of different services for cities, legal, training, and other types of services. But one of the major things that they do for us is follow the legislature for us. And they watch all of the bills that are filed, help summarize them for us. This particular organization is critical for us, not only in our everyday operation and learning how to be good council members, mayors, have connectivity with people across the state. This organization's been around for over 100 years. So it is important to the state and the way things work. So we are lucky enough today to have Bennett Sandlin with us. He has been the executive director of Texas Municipal League since 2010. Prior to that, he was general counsel, where he helped primarily in the fields of tax, economic development, budget, and finance issues. I'm sure you're all going to run out and buy this, but Bennett authored a book called Revenue Manual for Texas Cities. And he has been an instructor in public funds and investment training. He went to the University of Texas. He lives in Austin, loves Austin, but he also loves getting out all the way around the state. He previously worked for the Municipal Affairs Division of the Texas Attorney General's office too. So he's got a wide variety of information and connectivity in Austin, and he is invaluable to the cities of Texas for everything that he does for us. And we are lucky that he is here with us today. Monty Wynn was going to also join us, but as you can imagine, the legislature's getting in swing. There's a lot of hearings going on, and Monty is at the, he is at the legislature right now working and hearing what's going on. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Bennett. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon. It's great to be with you from down in Austin. I kind of wish I was up in Dallas, away from the craziness down here. But thank you, Mayor Hunt. You guys up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area know her as mayor. Down here in Austin, we know her as boss. She is modest about this, but she is the president of the entire Texas Municipal League this year, 1,164 cities strong, from Panhandle to the Valley to East Texas to the Metroplex. She is our fearless leader this session. And I guess we wore her out because she's not going to be back after this session. And I can't say that I blame her, but we appreciate her leadership during this tough session. And what a session it's been. You scheduled me on an interesting day. This is literally the halfway point of the 2021 session. 70 days down, 70 days to go. It truly one of the strangest sessions I've ever seen. Going into this session, obviously, we knew that the pandemic would present really radical challenges to get in the Capitol. Monty told me this last week when he first went over there, and now he's going daily, of course, that you literally have to go through a tent with armed guards with long guns, and you self-administer a COVID test, and then they sit all the lobbyists down over at one side of the tent while they wait on their results. And I guess it's kind of awkward when you don't pass. Maybe they send you home. I don't know. But once you pass, you head on into the Capitol, and it's a new day over there in terms of interacting. But I would say that it's almost back to full speed. Hearings are almost all in person now. There's very little zooming in of testimony. If you want to be heard, you kind of got to go over there. So we're down here very close to the Capitol. TML, as Mayor Hunt said, is sort of the spokesperson for Texas cities. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of perspective today on what cities, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're hoping doesn't get accomplished. But I also want to start out with kind of a general overview of things that I know you guys are interested in, because you're probably having these meetings every weekly or bi-weekly and sort of want to hear what's happening. Well, this week is the week that things have picked up in earnest. Committee hearings back to back to back. Floor action is picking up. And so it's been a very impactful last, I would say, 7 days at the Texas Capitol. The pandemic is the first issue, of course, and the big bill that's going to come out of that may or may not pass is House Bill 3. House Bill 3 is the big Governor's Powers Act, so to speak, and it's already undergone a very interesting transition. When that bill first got filed, it largely vested the governor with the same powers that he's exercised over the last year. And then as the bill morphed a bit into a substitute, it took many of those powers away and would vest them in a 10-person commission headed by the lieutenant governor, the speaker, and then 8 committee chairs. There was a hearing on Thursday, the 11th, on this bill. And I think the chances of anything changing, of this bill passing, are fairly small because it was getting slings and arrows from both sides of the political spectrum. Even though the bill was made less friendly to the governor, you still had sort of the right coming after it for having any powers at all in the governor. You have the left coming after it for not enough. And so when you have both sides of the spectrum attacking you on a bill, even by a very conservative author, I think the chances of it passing drop down quite a bit. So that's the overall picture of the pandemic. Is the big question is, does the governor come through this with more or less or the same amount of authority he had? You know, cities, we had it kind of interesting early on in the pandemic. From March through about early June, the governor's plan was to make mayors the tip of the attack on the pandemic. And we had very broad powers. Mayors could decide when to shut down and that type of thing, when to require masks. But then early summer in June, the governor stepped in and said, I'm going to take over all of that. And you didn't really see a ton of pushback from mayors. This is such an important and consequential pandemic that we decided to work with the governor and not against him. And so we didn't argue too much with that. But what it had the strange political result is that it's sort of the governor owns it now. You know, the thing that you break it, you own it, or whatever. That's what House Bill 3 is designed. It's a lot of folks that feel like the governor either had too much power or too little power. And cities sort of came out from under that criticism because we lost the authority that we had vis-a-vis the pandemic. So it's very interesting. That's the sort of the backdrop. And so the session began with a focus on the governor's power and coronavirus. And then lo and behold, a few weeks into it, we get one of the worst ice storms that we've ever seen in Texas. And so you've got a session that is beset by two major catastrophes. And that's almost too much work. Any one of those is almost too much work for our friends in Austin to take care of, much less two of them. So what came out of the ice storm is really twofold. You've got a Texas Senate that is wanting to focus right now on redistributing and sorting out all the financial mess that led to a so-called $16 billion in overcharges. What happened is that ERCOT left the gas rates at their maximum $9,000 plus, by some accounts, 36 to 40 hours too long, so to speak, longer than is necessary.
So are you pretty confident?
Create the incentive necessary to put as many plants back online. And so you had multiple billions of dollars. The numbers vary. Some people say 4, some people say 16. I'm not smart enough in utility issues to understand it, but at least 4 and as much as $16 billion of overcharges. And some utilities were winners, some were losers, some sort of broke even. And then that all trickles down to your consumers. And that's where you see some consumers getting $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 gas bills, electric bills because of the storm. So you've got a Texas Senate and a lieutenant governor that's determined to make that the number one priority. The Senate did something extraordinary last Monday I've never seen in my 21 years at TML. They gavelled in that morning, accepted a bill that had been filed that day, went into committee, came out of committee, went into session, went out of session, came back the next day, so to speak. They do this often. They meet multiple days in one day if they suspend the rules. And they passed a billing, ERCOT billing bill all in one day's time. And so you see where the lieutenant governor made this his priority. And it was designed a little bit to sort of catch the attention of the governor and the Speaker of the House. And then you saw the Speaker of the House say, we're not even going to take up that bill this session. We're going to go slower. And so the House's perspective is to be more deliberate, focus on things like winterization, hardening the grid, ERCOT structural reform, PUC structural reform. So we've already got halfway through the session, we've got sort of the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor at crossroads, at loggerheads, and the governor as well. And so you're already seeing some interchamber fighting going on, which does not bode well for fixing these issues, much less taking up some of the other big issues. I think the budget will pass this session. The budget is the only thing the legislature has to pass any given session, and the House and the Senate versions are very close. And so I think that will pass. Everything else is up in the air. We know one thing that won't pass, that has to pass eventually, is redistricting. We just had a very rocky census that was taking place during the pandemic. The numbers are very, very late and therefore are not going to get to us in time to take up redistricting this spring. So you'll probably see at least one special session on redistricting alone, probably no earlier than August and probably no later than November. So a fall special session on redistricting. So that's kind of where we stand on the big statewide issues. These two disasters are sucking up all the oxygen in the room over at the Capitol. It's very hard to find time for other things. What are some things that cities are on the same page with state leaders? The big one right now is broadband extension to the entire state, not just rural broadband, but underserved areas and urban areas as well. It's not as if DFW and Austin and San Antonio have got broadband figured out and the rest of the state doesn't. There's patches all over the state that have trouble. Mayor Hunt knows this closely. We had several legislative roundtable meetings early on in the session and before the session. And on at least 2 occasions, we had state legislators join into a Zoom meeting using dial-up. So go think about that for a moment. You know, my personal ignorance is wasn't even aware dial-up was still a thing that you could do it. I've been lucky to have broadband for 20, 25 years, but it's not true around the state. And that has trickled down. It makes things difficult for city councils, makes things different for schools, for kids trying to educate themselves. And so the TML board early on took a position that we're going to partner with state government to support finally fixing the expansion of broadband statewide. And that's going to be a partnership of business interest. We're a part of numerous coalitions of chambers, corporations, think tanks, nonprofits, and others to try to expand broadband across the state. And I think the pandemic sort of brought that home to bear. Related to that, one of the things that TML is pushing for this session is to make permanent the Open Meetings Act suspensions that Governor Abbott did early on in this pandemic. You'll recall that prior to COVID, if you wanted to speak to a city council meeting, you had to get in your car and drive over there. Mayor Hunt probably has hers at a certain time every week, and Dallas has theirs at a different time, and you've got to physically be there to speak. The governor suspended those rules and said that people can Zoom in or call in some cases. And I'll tell you this, if there's any silver lining to this, that has been a hit statewide with citizens and with city councils. Maybe not so much with city councils because people feel a little more free to speak from their couch, right, Mayor, than they do at the council meeting. But citizens love it, and it expands access to local government. So early on, we decided this is such a good idea, let's push for it. We thought some of the open government groups, the newspaper groups, and the freedom of information type folks would oppose it, but they have not. The only thing they have said is that they want to make sure that the final bill allows phone-in access and not just Zoom-in access so that, folks without computer access can still call in. And I think most mayors and councils are perfectly okay with that to the extent that we do this. So that may be kind of a silver lining as we get that bill passed. We've got support from both sides of the aisle. We've got Republicans like Senator Paxton up in the Dallas area that has filed this bill. We've got Democrats like Senator Menendez in San Antonio that have filed this bill. So it's a totally bipartisan issue, hopefully without a lot of controversy at this point. So those are the kind of things that TML is supporting this session. I'll tell you some of the things that we're not supporting and kind of what Mayor Hunt and Monty and myself have been busy the last 2 weeks on because they all hit at once. And we just had a hearing on one of them. The first is there's a bill, House Bill 1869, that would seriously limit the use of certificates of obligation for cities, counties, and schools. Schools don't use them so much, but cities and counties to build infrastructure, in many cases that help business and are partnering sometime with Chapter 312 agreements, 313 agreements, and so forth. These bills would require mandatory voter elections for a CO. So if a city wants to use a CO to build a small infrastructure project, they can no longer do that without having a full-blown bond election in November. And that bill was just heard this morning in the House Ways and Means Committee. There was testimony in favor, there was testimony against. I can't say yet what's going to come of that. I will say that the author is Chairman Burrows from the Lubbock area, and he's chair of the Calendars Committee, which is sort of the traffic cop for everything that moves in the House. So you don't want to oppose your Calendars chair. So that's the one thing that's got me worried about that bill. I think this is something that cities and businesses ought to partner on. Cities and counties are helping build the infrastructure that makes it possible for you guys to be successful in urban areas. And more than ever, we partner together on those projects. And so it's something to really keep an eye on. That's House Bill 1869 by Chairman Burrows. The other big bill that we're concerned about, and there's actually three of them, we're calling them the community censorship bills. And these are bills that prevent cities and counties from joining organizations like TML and trying to influence legislation or joining Chris's North Texas group, which I see is on the call. You couldn't do that under these bills. And the bills are Senate Bill 234 by Senator Hall from your area, though I don't think Senator Hall's bill is going to be the leading bill in the Senate. It's probably going to be Senate Bill 10, which was filed 2 weeks ago. And we thought would be heard today, but it's probably going to be heard next Monday. And we don't yet know how that bill is going to look. I'll tell you a little more about that in a moment. And then in the House, the bill is House Bill 749 by Mays Middleton. And all these bills would prevent membership in TML and so forth. But Senate Bill 10 goes beyond that. Senate Bill 10 says that cities and counties cannot spend any resources to either directly or indirectly affect legislation. So really this call we're having today, when I tell you my opinion on that certificate obligation bill, my opinion would be illegal under Senate Bill 10. I couldn't try to influence those bills. And people say, well, why should taxpayer dollars flow to that? And my response is, yes, I'm a lobbyist, but I'm not a lobbyist in the traditional sense. I don't wine and dine anybody. I don't have a PAC. I don't make campaign contributions through TML. All our sole currency is information. So getting on a call like this and telling you what I think about things, that's my effort to influence legislators. And if it succeeds, that's great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But these bills would literally outlaw that. And so it would change the structure of our organization. It would make the job of Mayor Hunt and Mayor of Dallas and Mayor of Fort Worth a whole lot more difficult. I was visiting with a senator in 2019 that supported a previous version of this concept. And she said, you know, I don't need to hear from you, Bennett. I can just hear from Mayor Price. Well, I'm kind of giving away probably what senator I was talking about there. Just let her come tell me what the bill does. And I said, Senator, respectfully, she would do that, but she's busy mayoring. She's filling potholes, arresting bad guys. She's the mayor. She doesn't have time to read those 7,500 bills that get filed every session. By the way, there's only 6,900 this session, so 6,900 ideas that we have to wade through. There's not a mayor in this state that has time to read those bills, much less digest them or hear the history of what's behind them. So we are very concerned that these bills would silence cities, and at the same time, they need to be your partner to make communities better. A couple of final issues I'll tell you that are pending, and then I want to leave some time for questions because I can't possibly cover everything that's going on. There's a series of so-called defunding bills, and those probably come out of where I live, the Austin area. You heard that the Austin City Council did some things with their budget last year over the Black Lives Matter and sort of that whole thing that was going on nationwide. Well, that caught the governor's attention, and a number of bills have been filed that would outlaw so-called defunding of police. And we're going to keep an eye on that. There's no city really, not even Austin, much less any other city, that truly has tried to reduce their city budget on their police. But these bills would punish cities for normal reductions in their budgets. For example, if you're a rural city out in West Texas that's shrinking, you're not going to need as many police officers 20 years from now as you do today. But this bill would create a spending floor in perpetuity. So we're kind of working with the authors on those. We think Senator Huffman in the Senate will be the sort of the lead senator on that bill. And she's a reasonable senator that we can work with. So we're already working with her office to try to get something we can live with, because that bill is going to pass. It is a governor priority. It sounds good to the public. Of course, we don't want to defund police. So something is going to pass. The key is we've got to work with those authors to get that bill in an acceptable form. The last item I want to talk about is one that should be of interest to any Texas business that sells anything, particularly retailers. And I know this is an issue that's near and dear to Mayor Hunt and others in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And that is, there's a ton of bills this session that would, in some cases, mildly, in some cases, radically restructure how city sales taxes get sourced around the state. Very generally speaking, right now, if you get on the internet or on the telephone and order something from Dallas, let's say you order a refrigerator, and it gets shipped from Dallas to Fort Worth, currently Dallas gets those sales taxes. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because Dallas probably provided the infrastructure and the streets and the warehouse and the workers that produced that refrigerator, or at least sold it. So prior to this session, Comptroller Hager passed some rules that don't go into effect. He very cleverly said the rules don't go into effect until after the session. Did you guys say you heard from Comptroller Hager recently in this series? He may have mentioned this.
Yeah, we did. He was our first speaker.
Yeah, what his rules say is that if you order something over the internet, then in many cases, those sales taxes, it's kind of complicated. I won't go too far into the details, but those sales taxes then get shifted to where the item is shipped. And so if you're a city with a lot of call centers, likewise, if you're a city with a lot of warehousing and logistics type facilities, and there's a few other categories, those cities look to lose a lot of sales taxes to the destination city. So no sooner, and so he delayed the enactment of those rules until after the session to give the legislature time to fix them if they wanted to, or to bless them if they were okay with them. And there's been a couple of bills filed that would fix that. House Bill 3538 by Representative Shine would say that there's a broader category of things that makes a city a place of business than just taking an order or being a warehouse type facility. And so we have that fight going on, and that's the narrow piece. And then lo and behold, we have a bill filed by the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, House Bill 4072, that would literally shift all sourcing of sales taxes from the origin to the destination city, way beyond just this narrow internet piece. And so that's a radical shift of money from one group of local governments to another that's really got our mayor's attention. I know Mayor Hunt will want to comment on this in a moment, but it's a big deal. And I don't know where that larger movement is coming from. I don't know if they just felt inspired by the comptroller to sort of put it all on the table and sort this out, but it's a radical shift of how sales taxes get sourced around the state. So I've kind of hit the high points. There's dozens of other issues. I hope we have time to for you guys to ask me a few questions. Happy to dive in deeper to the issues. Mayor Hunt, did you want to visit at all about the sales tax issue, or just see what and kind of tell us how that would affect Coppell and other cities in your situation?
Yeah, Coppell, this is kind of brings it into context. Coppell, right next to the airport, we have a lot of distribution centers. And basically over the last 15 years, we have developed that land, the commercial land near the airport, as distribution centers. So just as an example, if our budget is $110 million all in, this could potentially take about 12 million out of our budget. And if it completely shifts, it will be, we're guessing, probably 20% of our budget. So it's huge. And places like Coppell specifically used and understood the tax law so that we could take that money in and offset that revenue stream and be able to lower the residential real estate taxes, or actually we don't give anybody it's just real estate taxes in general. So it will, for some cities, it will be a 50-50. It will be a kind of a non-event. But then there will be some cities like Coppell that will be drastically hit. And it's what the thing for me that is just crazy is the comptroller's office wrote this rule without doing any investigation, without any due diligence. They have no idea how it's going to affect people across the state. And so the legislature, the people that are putting those, it's exactly the same thing. So what we are hoping that will happen is they will actually study it. And if they study it and make a decision, at least it's an informed one. And there will be winners and there will be losers, but at least it'll be an informed one.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm happy to answer any of the questions, any topics we didn't touch on that y'all are curious about, things you're hearing about through the press. I'd be happy to address that.
Thank you, Bennett, and thank you, Mayor, for that additional information. I've got a couple of questions that I'll start out with, and then we do want this program to be interactive. So if you've got a question for Bennett, please go ahead and post it in the chat or send it to me privately, and I'll call on you to ask it. But Bennett, you touched on almost all the bills that I wanted to ask you about, but you mentioned HB 749, which we have been tracking, the anti-lobbying bill, as part of our coalition led by the North Texas Commission. And I see Chris Wallace and Charlene Stark from the NTC on this call as well. We've been tracking that one and trying to figure out ways that we can make sure that that doesn't pass. Do you have any recommendations on what groups like ours can be doing to ensure that harmful legislation like this doesn't pass?
I think business groups are key to defeating this bill. And I think right now is time to talk to your senators. And, this bill came out of the Senate last session pretty handily, but I think we've got a chance to stop it in the Senate. And I think what you can do is hopefully, and this will be the truth, is communicate the value of the partnership between TML, between the North Texas Commission, between those entities and chambers of commerce, and how we're really driving the state forward. I've been saying probably the last 3 to 4 sessions have been really radically different for business at the Capitol. We used to have a business-friendly state government. And this was true under the Democrats, and it was true under the Republicans for many years. Both parties respected sort of the relationship and what business does and the importance of cities providing infrastructure for those business. But as we've kind of moved to the extremes, you got folks in both parties that don't appreciate that partnership like they used to. And so a result of that is things like Chapter 313, Chapter 312, Chapter 380, all these tools that we all joined together on to bring more business to Texas cities, they're kind of fallen by the wayside. You don't hear a lot about Chapter 313, and yet if it doesn't get reinstated this session, it goes away. And so I think what y'all can do mostly is say, as businesses, we appreciate the partnership that cities and businesses have these days, because we're all that's really left. We're kind of losing that focus at the Texas Capitol on what makes common sense, middle of the road, good government. And so we're all we've got left. And so that message, I think, will resonate with our moderates on both parties. And some of the people to be talking to right now are Senator Seligers, I'll just get right down to brass tacks, sort of the moderate R's in the Senate and in the House are going to be where this bill gets decided on. And those are the ones that I think y'all can visit with right away and make that point, if you will, because I think that partnership is there. And I think they've lost track of how less business friendly elements of both parties have become in the last 10 years at the Capitol.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bennett. And Chris Wallace or Charlene, is there anything you'd like to add? We're part of this North Texas Commission Coalition, and Chris and his team have led a call to action, which we've signed on to and have circulated to others to sign on to as well. But Chris, is there more that you want to add on this?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And hey, Bennett. The only thing I would add is we do have a business sign-on letter that we will send. I was just chatting with Jeff. We'll make sure that this entire group gets it. As Bennett says, when business talks, I think legislators really do pay attention carefully. And so this letter simply states that this is bad public policy. If this bill, particularly Mays' 749, as well as Bettencourt's Senate version of that bill, which is Senate Bill 10, if it does pass, it could potentially cost cities and counties even more money, taxpayers more money, because cities and counties would be ramping up their internal government relations teams, going through training, paying for lodging, travel back and forth to Austin. It could potentially cost taxpayers even more money than hiring professionals like they do for many other services in the city and county. And so, but it is truly bad public policy. It could certainly harm our cities and counties. Now that Bettencourt's bill just deals with cities and counties. If you look at Middleton's bill, which is up Thursday, we'll be there testifying against this. It has the whole kitchen sink. It includes special districts, airports, education, and so that's the way it's written, at least to date. And so it is all hands on deck to oppose House Bill 749. And next week, as Bennett pointed out, probably Senate Bill 10, if not the following week. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for that. If anybody wants to sign on to that, you haven't already done so, send me an email. I put my email in the chat, and we'll get you signed on to this letter.
Oh, Jeff, let me just add, Bennett had mentioned that Mayor Hunt is chairwoman of TML, and I know she's really enjoying that, but she's gonna like being chairwoman of the North Texas Commission next year even better. I just wanted to point that out to Bennett.
You stole her away from us, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bennett, another topic that we've talked about frequently in the last several sessions is municipal autonomy, or local control, as we call it. Are there bills that you're tracking this session which could impact the autonomy of cities, where the state is trying to take over some of the local control decisions that cities might be making?
Oh, yes, there's bills every session. What's a little humorous note, last session we faced a bill, we we call it the chicken bill. It would prohibit cities from regulating backyard chickens. And so every city, whether it was appropriate or not, you could have up to 6 chickens in coops in your backyard. Now, I live in Austin. We're kind of a hippy dippy city, and it's pretty cool to have chickens in your backyard here. But let's face it, that's not appropriate for every town in Texas. And that bill would have prohibited cities from regulating that. Lo and behold, we have a bill this session by Chairman Cortez and by Senator Zaffarini in San Antonio that not only it's not just chickens, it's chickens and bees. So you got to allow beehives in urban backyards, and so it's a surplus of those types of things. And that's been happening for decades. There's always been so-called preemption bills. Fortunately, we're seeing a little less of the effort to just sort of come across and cut cities off at the knees all across the board on preemption. We're not seeing the number of what we call super preemption bills that we used to see. And I think that's been a function of these two disasters. I think legislators are appreciating the partnership that local governments are having with the state. But yes, we're seeing a number of those bills. And we put out a Friday newsletter that summarizes every single one of them. And there are just too many to number at this point. But we're not seeing the movement on those like we have in the past.
That's good. Yeah, that's something that we've frequently addressed in previous sessions and haven't heard as much about this session. So it's good to see that legislators are finally coming around on that issue. One more question for me, and then I've got a few that are in the chat and private message me that I want to call on people for. We talked briefly about the winterization and the winter freeze and what happened there. Is TML taking any kind of position on what's best there as far as what should be done?
Yes, I've neglected to mention that. Shortly after the storm, we had a TML board meeting, and we did take 3 positions, very general supportive positions in support of helping to improve winterization, improve outcomes, and also to improve the situation of our city consumers who are going to foot the bill for this. Any bill that would alleviate the pain, sort of the bottom of the food chain, the consumer level, we would support as well. So TML is supportive of these bills. We're not going to get in the game of finger pointing because that's not our core issue, and nor do we understand it well enough to say it was clearly the PUC or it was clearly ERCOT or what. That's not our business, but we are going to support, if there is a consensus that comes out of this, both in the Senate side aiming at the billing issues, and both in the House side on winterization and grid hardening. We're going to support all 3 of those things because of a position that our board, we had a long discussion on that 3 weeks ago at our board meeting. And even though electricity is not a core city issue, we have some cities with municipal utilities. This was such a drastic and life-changing event that I think, and our mayors on our board believe that our citizens expect to see the TML taking a position. Otherwise, what are the mayors doing? That's kind of their way of having a voice at the Capitol. So long-winded answer, yes, we are supportive of those improvements to the process.
Great. Well, if there's anything that we on the chamber end can do to help with that process, let us know. Our first question is from our former board chair, Bill Siegel with Coles and Thompson. Bill.
Thank you, Jeff. Though this is a little bit off topic, I'm curious I know there's a number of voting rights bills that are being presented, and I heard by way of example this morning that Georgia was proposing restrictive voting requirements, and based on pressure from various groups, including chambers of commerce and businesses in general, have scaled back some of these restrictive measures. And I'm curious what's going on in the House and Senate as to these various voting rights bills.
Well, Bill, there's dozens of these bills filed, and they're all very similar to one another. They're all coming out of think tanks like ALEC and national think tanks. But I think the combined effect of the pandemic and the ice storm, this is one of those topics that's sort of getting squeezed aside. We haven't started seeing the committee hearings yet, the movement on these bills like you'd expect to see by late March on any big issue. Now, this issue is in both the governor and lieutenant governor's list of priorities, but they're just not moving yet. That's not to say they won't. They're very divisive, obviously. You got kind of a very partisan split on some of these bills. The majority of those bills address early voting in one way, shape, or form, because that's the one area where our laws, no matter what side you're on, they just weren't prepared for the level of early voting that we got across the country. And so I would say fully 60% of those bills address early voting in one shape or form, but they're just not moving yet. They're kind of the victim of the two catastrophes, and you either like that or don't like that, depending on where you sit. But they're just not getting the movement that you'd expect for such a big priority issue at this stage of the session.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill, for that question. Next question is from Dr. John Kabarczyk from the University of Phoenix. Dr. G.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, Bennett, I heard like in the COVID bill that just got passed, I think I read it was something around $13 billion was allocated for cities in Texas. The state has like 10 billion also. Is there any conversations, and I haven't done any research to see what the allocation strategy is for that, but is there any conversation about how that money is going to impact any legislation?
I don't know how it impact legislation, but I'll tell you, TML's partner at the national level, the National League of Cities, was really able to influence this round of stimulus more than they did the big CARES Act. CARES Act had a lot of city money in it and county money, but it was kind of a jumble in terms of who had what authority. Some of it had to pass through the state, and so you don't want to even state officials don't want to be responsible for deciding which city gets which share of that. And then some of the money we had to ask the counties for. This bill does a better job of directly allocating the city share that's in there directly to the cities. That being said, we haven't finished sorting it out how it all works yet. It's a massive bill. But as you mentioned, there's over $13 billion in there for Texas cities. And hopefully it's going to be a little easier for cities to directly access that for the things they can spend it on. There's also a problem with the CARES Act money, and that some of those funds had to be directly attributable to city expenses. Well, that's hard to do. I mean, you had some increased police having to deal with transport of patients. You had some of those issues, but mayors spent a lot of time, sorting through records, trying to peg every dollar to some direct expense. This money is a little more flexible, that recognizes that in some cases city revenue is just lower because of the pandemic. You're going to be able to offset some of that. So it's a little bit more flexible in that respect as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. G. Question next from Clifton Miller. Clifton, you're up.
Thank you very much. Couple of questions. One is around TML's position. Do you have a position on the concept of budgeting for outcomes? The Price of Government book that came out some time ago by Peter Wilkinson and it's in the chat. I forget the author's name right. But anyway, any position on budgeting for outcomes as it relates to developing city budgets? And then the other one, will you have a position, or will you take a position on redistricting?
Good questions. No and no at this point. And I've got to confess, I haven't read that book yet. I probably should have. Can you hum me a few bars of what is that tied to zero-based budgeting, or is that
no? It's the book is Cost of Government. Bruce Osborne and Peter Wilson. And Dallas was the first major city to adopt the budgeting for outcomes model back in 2005. And it is really where you evaluate the deliverables of a department. It's not balanced budgeting. It is, what is the taxpayers, what are they paying for actually? And each department has to rank their programs. And there's a above and below the line, and we can move on from that. But you might want to take a look at that book's been around a while, and Dallas was the first major city to adopt that model in 2005.
I'd like to see that. Good to hear. And your other question was about the mayor's climate initiative?
Mayor's climate and then redistricting. Does TML have a position on the mayor's? Assuming you all are familiar, the rest of the panel or the guests are familiar with the Mayor's Climate Organization and what's going on there.
I am familiar with that. And interestingly, the way we're structured is, even though a lot of legislators think of TML being an urban organization, we have hundreds and hundreds of very small cities. And so climate change, even as important as it is to people in urban areas and those on this call, it doesn't typically bubble up into our legislative program. I don't want to say you have cities on both sides of that, but you just have hundreds of small cities they're more focused on small revenue issues and things like that. So no, we have not taken a position on that. And redistricting, we stay strictly out of because it's so political, except for the piece of redistricting that affects cities that have their own voting zones and council member, what's the word I'm looking for? It's my business. Districts. They have their own district by council. Not every city does it that way. Many have at-large council members. But we do watch bills that would affect the duties and burdens on cities when they have to redistrict. Because not only does the state have to redistrict, those cities have to redistrict every 10 years. So we look at it from a procedural point of view. But as far as statewide allocation of House, Senate seats, congressional seats, we're strictly neutral because it's kind of depends on where you sit issue or whether you win or lose on those issues. I'll tell you this, what's interesting about Austin, Austin's not very well respected during the redistricting process. About 6 different U.S. congressional seats all end up in Austin with, it's like the middle of a pie. And so Austin doesn't have a majority U.S. congressional seat, amazingly, for a city of 1 million people. So Austin kind of suffers under redistricting, but from a broader perspective, TML takes no position because it's such.
But on a local basis, so does Mesquite.
Is that right?
Yeah, for state reps. If you look at those state representative districts up in Mesquite. So, but anyway, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Clifton, for that question. Next one is from another former board chair, Ramon Miguez of HDR. Ramon.
Thanks, Jeff. Bennett, I wanted to follow up on Bill Siegel's previous question regarding bills that might restrict voting. You mentioned that there were a number of bills that had in fact been introduced or proposed, but that it didn't have any traction. But my question is more specifically regarding, has TML taken any position on any of those?
No, we've not. Voting rights is, again, kind of we're an organization that has so many things that directly affect city government, city revenue, annexation, you name it, that these larger, I don't want to call them social issues, but larger issues that tend to divide people in some areas politically, we've customarily stay away from those because we have cities that sort of come at it from different approaches. So no, sir, we have not taken a position one way or the other on those. We do care about election issues that structurally affect cities. For example, there's a number of bills that would do away with May election dates, which primarily are utilized by cities and to some degree school districts. And we were opposed to cutting down the number of election dates that cities can use. We used to have 4 uniform election dates that we could choose from. Now we've got 2, and there's legislators, including Senator Betancourt, that want to make it all November. Now we've got cities that voluntarily went to November elections, and that's fine. But we've got a lot of cities that like to sort of be on their own, so they're not shunted to the bottom of the ballot. There's also a bill this session that would, the bill number eludes me, but I can get it to you if you're interested, that I consider the worst idea of all. And that is to require mayors to run partisan, put an R or a D next to their name. And when I speak to county groups, my colleagues, I say, is your county jail a Republican jail or a Democrat jail? And they laugh and they say, well, it's neither. And I said, well, why do you have to run? And they say, it's one or the other. And I say, we don't know. We don't know the history. So I just know that they don't like it any more than we do for the most part. And the last thing we need to do is politicize the jobs of mayors. I mean, we might know the mayor of Dallas, which party he's from, or we might know the mayor of Fort Worth, which party she's from, but it doesn't really affect 99% of what they or Mayor Hunt does on a day-to-day basis. And so that is something we have a strong position against, is politicizing city elections.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bennett. And that the timing of elections issue is something that we've looked at in the past, and we haven't arrived at a conclusion, but I think there's valid points on both sides. But one point I'd make there is if you do end up moving all these city elections into November, you run into a challenge because there's no primary. And so you're going to go into a runoff, and the runoff is probably going to be in December, which means you're going to be campaigning through Thanksgiving and into the holidays, and turnout might be even more depressed. And so that's certainly something to think about when making a decision on that. I think my preference is probably to keep it where they are, but certainly think there's valid arguments on both sides.
Well, when the law changed 15, 20 years ago that allowed some cities to switch their dates, we had cities that jumped all over it. They thought it was the greatest thing they'd ever heard. And we had some cities that's like, no way. So it's really interesting that there's kind of a split of opinion on May, November elections. And of course, having bond elections in May rubs a lot of people the wrong way, a lot of legislators, because they think the turnout's too low. And that is a big issue this session. Even if election dates don't move from May to November, there's a number of bills that would require all bond elections to move from May to November. So that issue is out there as well.
Do you think any of those bills are going to get any traction this cycle?
Yeah, the certificate of obligation bill I told you about has more traction than I've ever seen it. And again, it's got an author who's the chairman of an important House committee. And so that is one of that up there with the community censorship bill. And I call it community censorship because we outlawed here at TML the term taxpayer funded lobbying because it sort of works. We don't really lobby in the usual sense. I have a jar in my office. Any of my employees use the word taxpayer funded lobbying. They have to put $10 in there. So we call it community censorship. But that's what I mean when I say that. So those are our two sort of oppositional priorities, and they're already hitting this week. And we're going to have 749 later this week. We had the CO bill today. So that's why Monty couldn't be with us. It's hitting us all at once. And if we can sort of skate through with positive outcomes on both of those bills, then cities as a whole will have a good session. If we can get broadband, if we can get Open Meetings Act approved, these things that we all agree on, I think those will be, we never want to have a disaster, but those are sort of silver linings to these two disasters that hit home how important it is to have those features. And I think they're related. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to sit at home in your pajamas and talk to your city council. I know it's a hassle for councils to work through that, but we've seen some tremendous turnout at public hearings, because of the governor's suspensions. And so we're going to try to extend those and make those permanent.
That's great, Bennett. Thanks very much. I think we've got time for one more question. So real quick, anything new on eminent domain? Texas Central, getting that passed is a priority of this region. But anything that y'all are tracking on the eminent domain front that you want to touch on?
No, the high speed has been kind of low key. The only big area we've seen that's going to be a fight on eminent domain is pipelines. Is your gas pipelines coming from West Texas, coming east to the coast. And it is one of those other issues that's kind of getting squeezed out by this disaster du jour, whatever it may be for you. And so there is a number of bills on those. We won't see generalized eminent domain reform bills. I've seen none of those. A couple of procedural things, that adding some things to the landowner's Bill of Rights, stuff that everybody can agree on. So no, general eminent domain reform, I'm not going to say it's dead because you never know what comes up late in a session, but there's not, the days of eminent domain for economic development, all those big fights we had, that's not happening in 2021, I don't think.
Great. Thanks very much. Well, Bennett, we're coming up on our 3:00 hour. We can't thank you enough for taking the time to go through some of these bills. The session's been highly dynamic, and so we appreciate you coming in right in the middle. I know this is the busiest time. We got off to a pretty slow start. It seemed like nothing was going to happen, and then all of a sudden a lot of stuff started happening. So we appreciate you appearing during our busiest time. I'm going to turn the program back over to our good friend Karen Hunt and let her close us out.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Bennett. I do appreciate it. It is sometimes lost, as I said at the beginning, that all the different things that are going on, sometimes that cities feel like we're getting from a lot of different directions. And so it is always a challenge when we go into the legislative session. Most, not all, but most of the council members and the mayors, especially in this area, have full-time jobs. And this is one of the reasons that the censorship bill is important to us, because first you have your full-time job, then you have your mayor or council job. And oh, by the way, you still do have families. So understanding everything that's going on and learning how things happen, and not being able to go out and get that information is a huge for us. So please keep that in mind when people are asking you your opinion. It is important to all cities across the state. Again, thank you to our sponsors. We want to always make sure that we thank them on a regular basis. And There is, Bennett, we will be making a donation in your name to for our thanks to you for the Austin Street Shelter. It's not
Super.
Austin where you live, but Austin here.
Thank you very much. That's really great.
We're going to leave the line open for a little bit. If you're able to stay, if you have other questions or you just want to chit chat and say hello to some of the other 20 or 30 people that are on the line. So have a great day, and hope you have your umbrella because it is raining out there. Thank y'all.